For years, Judge Richard Holloway ruled his courtroom like a king, twisting the law to serve his own interests, silencing those who dared to challenge him. When Angela Carter, a determined young attorney, stood before him, he didn't just dismiss her case, he humiliated her. But Holloway underestimated his opponent. Angela refused to back down. When she tried to become state prosecutor, her application mysteriously vanished. Then, false allegations surfaced to destroy her career. Someone powerful wanted her gone. But instead of breaking, Angela fought back. What she uncovered shook the entire justice system to its core. And as the truth spread, Holloway's once unshakable empire began to crumble. How does a man who once controlled the law become a prisoner of it? How does a woman who was silenced rise to take him down? This is the story of power, corruption, and the pursuit of justice. And trust us, you won't believe the twists that come next. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a second of this shocking downfall. Angela Carter stood tall in the courtroom, her hands gripping the podium in front of her. She had built her entire defense on solid evidence, on logic, on truth. Yet, none of it seemed to matter. Judge Richard Holloway sat above her, a smirk tugging at the corners of his thin lips. He tapped his gavel lightly against the desk, drawing out the suspense. Angela already knew the verdict before he spoke. "This court finds the defendant guilty," Holloway declared, his voice laced with indifference. As expected, a murmur rippled through the room. Angela's chest tightened, but she refused to let her composure crack. She had anticipated this outcome. What she had not anticipated was the sheer arrogance in his tone. "As expected?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Holloway leaned forward, amusement flashing in his cold, gray eyes. "Yes. Women like you rarely understand the intricacies of the law. Consider this a lesson, Miss Carter. Not everyone is meant to rise above their station." The words were a slap across the face. A slow rage simmered beneath Angela's skin, but she swallowed it down. This wasn't the time to lose control. "Your Honor," she began, "I respectfully enough." Holloway interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "You have wasted enough of this court's time." Angela clenched her fists at her sides. Around her, the spectators sat in tense silence, many too afraid to react. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others avoided looking at her entirely. She had seen this happen before. She had seen how Holloway operated, how he crushed those who dared challenge him, how he twisted justice to suit his biases. He wasn't just a bad judge. He was a dangerous one. The bailiff stepped forward, motioning for Angela to leave. She hesitated for half a second before lifting her chin and turning toward the exit. As she walked past the rows of people, a quiet voice stopped her. "Do not let this be the end." Angela turned, locking eyes with an older woman in the audience. The woman had once been a respected attorney, a fighter for justice, before she mysteriously disappeared from the legal world. "Fight," the woman whispered, "or they will never stop." Angela didn't respond, but something inside her shifted. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with the summer heat. Angela inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. The humiliation, the injustice, it all felt too familiar. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could call it a day, accept the loss, and move on. It would be easier. But was that who she was? No. Angela Carter did not back down. She opened her messages and typed a single sentence. "We need to talk. I have a plan." Then she hit send. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Angela Carter sat in her dimly lit apartment, her laptop glowing in the darkness. The courtroom humiliation still played on repeat in her mind. Judge Holloway's smug expression, the way he dismissed her words, the finality of his gavel slamming down. She refused to let that be the end. Her phone vibrated. The message she had sent earlier had reached its recipient. A few seconds later, a reply popped up. "Meet me at the diner. Midnight." Angela didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys and stepped into the night. The diner was nearly empty at this hour, save for a tired waitress behind the counter and a few late-night stragglers. In the farthest booth sat David Ramirez, an investigative journalist and an old friend. He looked up as Angela slid into the seat across from him. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "Holloway didn't even try to hide it this time." Angela let out a slow breath. "He never does. Because he thinks no one can stop him." David leaned forward. "But you're not just anyone. What's the plan?" Angela pulled out a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. Inside were copies of documents, court records, inconsistencies in Holloway's rulings, evidence of his bias. "I want to take him down," she said. "And I know exactly how." David flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. "This is good, Angela. But it's not enough to bring him down legally." "Not yet." She nodded. "Which is why I'm applying for state prosecutor." David's eyebrows shot up. "Are you serious?" Angela folded her arms. "If I get the position, I'll have the authority to investigate Holloway properly. I can access sealed cases, find the proof that will end his career for good." David considered this for a moment. "It's risky, but if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Angela smirked. "That's the plan." The next morning, Angela wasted no time. She meticulously prepared her application for state prosecutor, highlighting her experience, her track record, and her vision for reform. If she won, she could reshape the justice system from the inside. Days passed. She checked the website obsessively, waiting for the candidate list to be posted. Finally, the day arrived. Angela sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she refreshed the page. A list of names appeared. Her name was missing. Cold shock ran through her. She had met every requirement. She was qualified, more than qualified. Someone had erased her. Her phone rang. It was David. "I checked with my sources," he said without preamble. "Angela, someone inside the selection committee removed your application." This wasn't a mistake. Angela gritted her teeth. "Let me guess, Holloway?" "Maybe not directly, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of his allies pulled the strings." Angela clenched her fists. First, he humiliated her in court. Now, he was trying to erase her entirely. Not happening. "What's the next move?" David asked. Angela's mind raced. If they thought they could silence her this easily, they were dead wrong. She straightened. "We're going to expose them. All of them." A slow grin spread across David's face. "Now that's the Angela I know." This wasn't just about getting a job anymore. This was war. And Angela Carter was not going to lose. Angela Carter stared at the empty space where her name should have been. The official list of candidates for state prosecutor was right in front of her, yet she was nowhere on it. Someone had erased her. Her blood boiled, but anger wouldn't fix this. Action would. Her phone buzzed again. "David, you still there?" he asked. Angela exhaled, steadying herself. "Yeah, I'm here. And I'm not backing down." David let out a short laugh. "Good, because I just did some digging, and you're going to want to hear this." Angela grabbed a notepad and pen. "Tell me everything." 20 minutes later, Angela and David sat in a cramped office at the Independent Legal Watch, a nonprofit that investigated corruption in the justice system. Papers were strewn across the desk, newspaper clippings pinned to a corkboard. At the center of it all was a photo of Judge Holloway. David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "The committee that removed your application? Turns out 2 of the deciding members have direct ties to Holloway. One of them was his former law clerk." Angela clenched her jaw. "So he's rigging the process to keep people like me out." "Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting." David slid a folder toward her. "They weren't just blocking you. They were manipulating the entire process. Look at who actually made the cut." Angela flipped through the list. A familiar name jumped out at her: Nathaniel Briggs. Her stomach twisted. Briggs was a career politician, not a prosecutor. He had no courtroom experience, no real background in criminal law. But what he did have was a reputation for doing whatever his donors wanted. And if he won, he would be nothing more than a puppet. "This isn't just about me," Angela said slowly. "They're handpicking someone they can control." David nodded. "And you were a threat to that plan." Angela's mind worked fast. If she couldn't fight from the inside, she would have to fight from the outside. "We need to expose this," she said. "Publicly." David smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next morning, Angela stood in front of the state judicial building, cameras flashing around her. The steps were packed with reporters, microphones aimed at her like weapons. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. "My name is Angela Carter," she began, her voice steady. "And I was a candidate for state prosecutor until I was illegally removed." The murmurs started immediately. Angela continued. "The selection process was supposed to be fair, but two committee members with direct ties to Judge Holloway made sure that wasn't the case. My application was erased, and the person who was selected instead, Nathaniel Briggs, wasn't chosen for his qualifications, but for his loyalty to the people in power." Gasps rippled through the crowd. David stood nearby, phone in hand, live streaming every second. Within minutes, the news was spreading online like wildfire. One reporter pushed forward. "Do you have proof?" Angela lifted a thick folder. "Every document, every connection, every falsified record. And I'm demanding an immediate investigation." Another reporter called out, "Judge Holloway has denied any involvement. Do you believe he's behind this?" Angela met the reporter's eyes. "Holloway has been manipulating the system for years. And this is just another example of how corruption infects our legal system. But I'm not going to let them win." The cameras clicked furiously. "If they want to fight," Angela said, her voice strong, "they've got one." And this time, she wasn't playing by their rules. Angela Carter's press conference had ignited a firestorm. By the time she got back to her office, the story was everywhere. News anchors debated it on live television, hashtags with her name trended online, and public outrage spread like wildfire. But she knew this wasn't over. Judge Holloway wasn't the type to sit back and watch. He would strike back. The only question was how. Her phone rang. "David." She picked up immediately. "Tell me you've got something." David's voice was tense. "Angela, we have a problem." She stiffened. "What kind of problem?" He hesitated. "Briggs is holding a press conference in an hour. They're trying to discredit you." Angela's stomach tightened. "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'm on my way there now." Angela grabbed her coat. "I'm coming with you." By the time they arrived, the City Hall courtyard was packed. Reporters, political aides, and Holloway's allies filled the space, surrounding Nathaniel Briggs as he stood behind the podium. His suit was perfectly pressed, his expression rehearsed. Angela and David slipped into the crowd just as he began speaking. "The recent allegations made against the judicial selection process are baseless," Briggs declared, his voice smooth. "Miss Carter's claims are nothing more than the actions of a disgruntled candidate who failed to meet the requirements." Angela clenched her fists. "Furthermore," Briggs continued, "evidence has surfaced that raises concerns about her professional history." Angela's heart pounded. What was he talking about? Then, the screen behind him lit up. A document appeared, an official-looking legal report with Angela Carter's name stamped across it. Briggs gestured toward it. "This document," he said, "suggests that Miss Carter was previously investigated for misconduct during a legal case." Gasps spread through the audience. Cameras turned toward Angela, capturing her stunned expression. She had never been investigated for misconduct. This was a lie. David leaned in. "This is bad, Angela. Even if it's fake, the damage is done." Angela's pulse raced. This was Holloway's counterattack. They couldn't erase her, so they were trying to destroy her credibility. Briggs continued, "Given these revelations, I urge the public to focus on the facts, not the baseless accusations of a failed candidate. He smiled. The legal system must remain protected from personal vendettas. Angela felt the rage bubbling up inside her. They were trying to paint her as unstable, unqualified, and bitter. She couldn't let them win. She stepped forward. That document is a fabrication. All eyes turned to her. Reporters scrambled to aim their microphones in her direction. Briggs looked amused, as if he had expected her outburst. Angela lifted her chin. I have never been investigated for misconduct. This is nothing more than a desperate attempt to smear my name. Briggs feigned concern. Are you accusing the judicial system of corruption, Miss Carter? Angela met his gaze. I'm accusing you of lying. A hush fell over the crowd. Briggs laughed. That's a bold claim. Do you have proof? Angela's mind raced. She needed anything. Then, David's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, eyes widening. He whispered, we might have just found our proof. Angela's pulse quickened. Then let's end this. Briggs had thrown his best punch. Now it was time for Angela to strike back. Angela Carter's heartbeat pounded in her ears as David leaned closer, his voice a whisper. I just got a message from my source. That misconduct report? It's completely fake. Angela swallowed her anger and turned back to Nathaniel Briggs, who was still smirking at her in front of the cameras. You asked for proof, she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Fine. Let's talk about proof. David handed her his phone, the screen displaying an internal email from the Judicial Selection Committee. Angela took a deep breath and read it out loud. Per Judge Holloway's instructions, ensure Carter's name is removed from consideration. If necessary, fabricate concerns about her record. The crowd gasped. Holloway's name was right there, in black and white. Briggs's smirk vanished. Angela held up the phone for the cameras. This is a direct order to erase me from the election process, and when that failed, they created false misconduct allegations. Reporters exploded with questions. The cameras zoomed in. The scandal had just blown wide open. Briggs tried to recover. This is absurd, he said, his voice shaky. Miss Carter, anyone can forge an email. How do we know this isn't just a stunt? Angela narrowed her eyes. Because my source is inside the committee. Briggs paled. Angela pressed forward. If you have nothing to hide, let's settle this right now. Let's demand an independent review of the selection process. If I'm lying, you have nothing to worry about. Briggs hesitated. The reporters caught it. He was scared. Then the unexpected happened. A voice called out from the back. I have something to say. The crowd parted, revealing a middle-aged man in a suit. Michael Lorne, a former member of the Judicial Selection Committee. Briggs's face turned white. Lorne stepped forward. Angela Carter is telling the truth. A stunned silence fell over the courtyard. Lorne cleared his throat. I was on the selection committee, and I saw firsthand how her application was removed. Judge Holloway pressured us to ensure she was never considered. When that wasn't enough, they fabricated that misconduct report. Angela's breath caught. She had expected resistance. She hadn't expected an insider to turn on Holloway. Briggs took a step back, panic flashing in his eyes. You can't prove that. Lorne nodded grimly. Actually, I can. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. I saved copies of everything. Briggs froze. Angela didn't blink. Then let's make sure the whole world sees it. David stepped forward, holding up his phone. We're live streaming this right now. Briggs realized he was finished. The reporters swarmed him, demanding answers. Briggs stammered, trying to spin the story, but it was too late. Angela turned to the cameras. This isn't just about me. This is about justice. About a system that has been manipulated for too long. But today, we take the first step toward exposing it. The crowd erupted in applause. Judge Holloway had tried to erase her. He had tried to destroy her credibility. And now, she was the one exposing him. But Angela knew this wasn't over. Holloway wouldn't go down without a fight. And she was ready. Judge Richard Holloway sat in his darkened office, the flickering glow of the news broadcast illuminating his face. Angela Carter's voice rang clear through the speakers. Today, we take the first step toward exposing corruption in our justice system. Holloway's jaw tightened as the screen showed Nathaniel Briggs cornered by reporters, his face pale, his carefully crafted image crumbling. Then came Michael Lorne, holding up that damned flash drive, the one filled with evidence. His grip on his glass of scotch tightened. Angela Carter had become a problem, a serious problem. He had underestimated her. He thought humiliating her in court would break her. Then, when she applied for state prosecutor, he had ensured her name was erased. And when that failed, he had fabricated a misconduct charge. Yet, she was still standing. And now, she had turned the entire justice system against him. Holloway took a slow sip of his drink. He wasn't out yet, but if he didn't act fast, he soon would be. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Unknown caller. He answered. Speak. A low voice responded. We have a situation. Lorne has more than just that flash drive. He's been keeping records for years. Holloway exhaled slowly. And we can make it go away. Holloway smirked. That was what he liked to hear. Do it, he ordered. And make sure Carter doesn't get any closer. The line went dead. He leaned back in his chair. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Angela paced across her apartment, phone pressed to her ear. You don't think Holloway's just going to sit back and let this happen, do you? David's voice crackled on the other end. Angela rubbed her temple. No. He's going to fight back. The question is how. David sighed. Lorne is taking a huge risk. If Holloway comes after him, a loud bang interrupted him. Angela's stomach dropped. It wasn't coming from David's end. It was outside her apartment. She hurried to her window, peering through the blinds. Her street was quiet, but something felt off. A black car was parked across the road. It hadn't been there before. Her instincts screamed danger. Angela? David asked. She forced herself to sound calm. I think I'm being watched. Silence. Then I'm coming over. Angela didn't argue. She kept her eyes on the car. No movement. No sign of who was inside. A warning? Or a threat? Either way, it meant one thing. Holloway was getting desperate. And desperate men were dangerous. Michael Lorne hurried out of his office, clutching his briefcase. His hands trembled as he stepped onto the quiet street. He had taken a risk by speaking out, but it was the right thing to do. Holloway had gotten away with too much for too long. But now he had proof. As he reached his car, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? A deep voice replied, You should have stayed quiet, Lorne. The call cut off. A chill ran down his spine. He turned, his heart pounding. The street was empty. Too empty. He fumbled with his keys. But before he could react, a figure stepped from the shadows. Lorne barely had time to gasp before hands grabbed him, yanking him into the darkness. The briefcase hit the pavement. The evidence inside? Scattered across the street, unnoticed. Angela Carter's foot tapped anxiously against the floor as she sat in her apartment, staring at the black car still parked across the street. The longer it stayed there, the more certain she became this wasn't a coincidence. Her phone buzzed. David. I'm outside, he said. Angela hurried to the door, peeking through the peephole before unlocking it. David stepped in quickly, closing the door behind him. He didn't waste time. Holloway's making his move, Angela. We need to be careful. She nodded, jaw clenched. I think they're watching me. David glanced at the window. That car? Angela exhaled. It's been there since the press conference. No one's gotten in or out. David's face darkened. That's not just surveillance. That's intimidation. Angela didn't scare easily, but even she knew what this meant. Holloway was done playing defense. He was coming for her. Then David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His face paled. "What?" Angela asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "It's Lorne," David muttered. "He's missing." Angela's breath hitched. "What do you mean missing?" David's hands tightened around his phone. "He left his office hours ago. Never made it home. His briefcase was found in the street empty." Angela's stomach dropped. Holloway got to him. Silence hung heavy between them. If Holloway was willing to disappear Lorne, that meant they were running out of time. Angela forced herself to think. "Lorne had backups, right? You said he kept records for years." David nodded. "He mentioned multiple copies. But if Holloway took him, he'll go after those too." Angela grabbed her bag. "Then we have to find them before he does." Judge Holloway sat in his private study, a slow smirk curling on his lips. "Is it done?" he asked. A voice on the other end of the call replied, "Lorne's been taken care of." "Good," Holloway said. "And the evidence?" There was a brief pause. "Still looking for the other copies." Holloway's smirk faded. "Find them now." If those records resurfaced, he was finished. He hung up, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Angela Carter had been a thorn in his side for far too long. It was time to cut her off permanently. Angela and David tore through Lorne's office, searching for anything he might have hidden. The place was a mess, papers scattered, drawers overturned. Someone had been here before them. David cursed. "They beat us to it." Angela scanned the room. If she were Lorne, where would she hide something crucial? Then her eyes landed on the bookshelf. She walked over, running her hands along the spines. Her fingers brushed against one that felt off. She pulled it. A small false panel clicked open. Inside was a USB drive. Angela snatched it up. "Got it." David exhaled. "Let's go before they come back." But as they reached the door, footsteps sounded from the hallway. Angela's heart pounded. They weren't alone. David whispered, "We need an exit now." Angela's eyes darted to the window. It was their only option. She yanked it open. "Come on." David hesitated only for a second before climbing through. Angela followed, just as the door burst open behind them. They hit the pavement running. Angela clutched the USB drive tightly. This was their only chance. Holloway wanted to bury the truth, but she was about to set it free. Angela Carter sprinted through the darkened alley, her pulse hammering in her ears. The USB drive burned in her grip like a live grenade. This was the proof Holloway feared the most. David ran beside her, throwing glances over his shoulder. "They're following us." Angela didn't need to look. She could hear the heavy footsteps behind them, closing in fast. Whoever Holloway had sent wasn't here to talk. They reached the end of the alley, a dead end. Angela's mind raced. No time for hesitation. She spotted a fire escape ladder hanging just above their reach. "Boost me up." David cupped his hands. Angela stepped into them, pushing off as he hoisted her up. She grabbed the metal bars, pulling herself onto the platform. Then a gunshot. The bullet ricocheted off the brick wall near David's head. Angela's heart lurched. "Come on." David jumped, grabbing the ladder as Angela pulled him up just as two men in dark suits burst into the alley below. One of them pointed. "They've got the drive." Angela and David ran across the rooftop, leaping over vents and pipes, the city stretching out before them. The men below shouted into radios more were coming. David huffed. "We can't keep running forever." Angela skidded to a stop, gripping the USB tightly. "We don't have to." She yanked out her phone and started uploading the drive's contents. If they wanted to erase the truth, she would make sure it was seen first. David caught on. "You're sending it to the press?" Angela nodded. "And every law office, watchdog group, and social justice network I can think of." The loading bar crawled forward. "Come on. Come on." A door slammed open. More men appeared on the rooftop. They were trapped. David raised his fists. "Guess we fight now?" Angela took a step forward, shielding her phone screen. 90%. One of the men smirked. You're done, Carter. Hand it over. Angela met his eyes. Or what? You'll try to make me disappear like Lorne. The man's smirk faltered. Lorne was a message. You don't get a second warning. Angela held up her phone, the screen flashing. Upload complete. She smiled. Too late. The men lunged. Angela dodged the first, twisting his arm and using his own momentum to slam him against a vent. David took on the second, ducking a punch and countering with a sharp elbow. To the ribs. But more were coming. Too many. David grabbed Angela's wrist. Time to go. She hesitated only a second before following. They sprinted toward the edge of the rooftop. A narrow gap separated them from the next building. David cursed. Tell me you've done this before. Angela took a deep breath. Nope. Then she jumped. For a split second. She was weightless. Then she landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact. David followed a second later, landing beside her. He groaned. Never doing that again. Angela grabbed his hand, pulling him up. Move. They disappeared into the night as Holloway's men stood at the edge, watching them escape. But it didn't matter anymore. The evidence was out. The whole world would know the truth. And Holloway? His time was up. Judge Richard Holloway's office was normally a sanctuary of power, a place where he made decisions that shaped the very fabric of the legal system. But tonight it felt like a prison. The television on his desk blared breaking news. Explosive corruption scandal. Judge Richard Holloway at the center of illegal judicial manipulation. Every major network was covering it. The leaked documents, his orders to erase Angela Carter's application, the fabricated misconduct report, and the secret deals with Nathaniel Briggs were now public knowledge. The email evidence, the financial records, everything Angela had uncovered had been broadcasted to millions. Holloway's phone rang. He snatched it up. Tell me you fixed this. A panicked voice on the other end. We can't. It's everywhere. The governor's office is calling for an investigation. The Bar Association wants you suspended. The FBI is getting involved. Holloway slammed the phone down so hard the glass on his desk cracked. His empire was collapsing. And it was all because of her. Angela Carter. His lips curled into a snarl. That woman should have known her place. Another call. He hesitated before answering. Nathaniel Briggs. Do something. Briggs hissed. They're coming after all of us. If I go down, I swear I'll take you with me. Holloway clenched his jaw. Briggs was panicking, which meant he was weak. And weak men made desperate choices. Calm yourself, Holloway said, his voice icy. I still have options. Briggs scoffed. Really? Because from where I'm standing, we're a sudden knock at Holloway's door. Loud. Authoritative. His blood ran cold. Judge Holloway. A voice called from the other side. This is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. The world tilted beneath him. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Richard. Briggs was still shouting through the phone. Are you listening to me? Holloway hung up. Another knock. More urgent this time. Open the door, Your Honor. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. How many times had he sat on the bench, watching defendants squirm as he handed down their sentences? Now he was the one on trial. He straightened his tie. No matter what happened next, he would not beg. He would not plead. He reached for the door. As soon as it opened, flashlights blinded him, and strong hands yanked him forward. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and judicial misconduct, the lead agent said. You have the right to remain silent. Holloway barely heard the rest. The cameras outside flashed wildly, catching the fall of a king. And standing just beyond the flashing lights, watching with calm, unshaken confidence, Angela Carter. She met his gaze, tilting her head slightly. No words needed to be spoken. They both knew who had won. As Holloway was shoved into the back of the FBI vehicle, he gritted his teeth. Angela Carter had taken everything from him. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The courtroom was packed. Angela Carter sat at the prosecutor's table, her hands steady, her eyes locked on the man sitting across from her Judge Richard Holloway. No longer on the bench, no longer wielding power. He now sat where so many others had before him, the defendant's chair. The irony was almost poetic. The room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filled the gallery, pens scratching furiously on notepads. The trial of the once untouchable judge had gripped the nation. Every detail of his corruption, every shady deal, every manipulation of justice had been exposed. And now, it was time for the verdict. The judge, an impartial one this time, cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a decision? A woman in the jury box stood. We have, Your Honor. Angela stole a glance at Holloway. His face remained unreadable, but she could see the stiffness in his shoulders, the slight tension in his jaw. He was afraid. Good. The juror unfolded the paper. On the charge of judicial misconduct, we find the defendant guilty. A murmur rippled through the room. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. Angela's heart pounded. On the charge of conspiracy to falsify legal records, we find the defendant guilty. The words slammed into Holloway like a gavel to the chest. His empire, his legacy, his very name all destroyed. The judge nodded solemnly. The court accepts the jury's verdict. Sentencing will commence immediately. Holloway stiffened. The judge continued. Given the severity of the crimes and the gross abuse of power, the court sentences Richard Holloway to 15 years in federal prison. Gasps echoed. The sentence was harsher than expected. A lifetime for a man like Holloway. Angela exhaled. Justice. At last. As the bailiff approached Holloway, he finally snapped. This is a farce, he thundered, standing abruptly. I was the law. I built this system. Angela stood too, meeting him head-on. And that's exactly why you're here. For the first time, true defeat flickered in his eyes. As the bailiff grabbed his arm, Holloway turned toward Angela. You think you've won? His voice was low, bitter. You think this changes anything? The system will still be corrupt. People like me will always exist. Angela held his gaze unwavering. Maybe, she admitted. But today, we took one of you down. Holloway sneered, but there was no power left in it. Only the anger of a man who had lost everything. Angela watched as he was led away, handcuffs glinting under the courtroom lights. It was over. 1 week later, Angela stood outside the state prosecutor's office. The air felt different now, lighter, clearer. She had spent her life fighting for justice. Now, she had the power to reshape it. Her phone buzzed. David. She picked up. Tell me you're calling with good news. David chuckled. Briggs took a plea deal. He's agreed to testify against every corrupt official he worked with. This is bigger than just Holloway. Angela smiled. Good. Let's finish what we started. She hung up and turned toward the office doors. A new fight was coming. But today, Angela Carter had won. Justice had been served. Angela Carter stood up against injustice, fought against corruption, and proved that no one, not even the most powerful judge, is above the law. This story was about perseverance, courage, and the power of truth. But in the real world, the fight for justice is far from over. What did you think of Angela's journey? Do you believe justice always wins in the end? Let us know in the comments. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you love gripping stories with shocking twists and inspiring victories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. And remember, stand up for what's right. Always.